Okay, in this video I was tasked to create some maple live edge shelves. These live edge shelves are going to be multiple sizes, will be two. Going to be 38 by 12 by 1.5 inch thick, and 28. There's going to be three of them at 28 inches long or wide by 12 inches deep by 1.5 inches thick. They'll be maple, and they're going to be finished with epoxy and some mineral oil and other mixtures just on top, just to give it a little more protection. And so right now we're going to start with just cleaning these up. So I'm not going to cut them down to size yet. I'm going to try to clean up one edge first, so that way I have consistent cleanup, and then we'll start ripping these down and trimming them down to the final dimensions before we start doing sanding and cleaning up that way. And the good thing about these, they're only going to be 12 inches deep to about 13, a little under, so I can fit these to my planer, which will help me definitely speed this process up a little bit. So that's what we're doing now. We're going to start just cleaning up this bark, and then we're going to run through the grinder, little hand plane, and sander, and just clean these up. So you can see I decided to go with the track saw here. So we're going to make multiple passes with these cuts. Since this wood's about 1 inch or 2 inches thick, so we're just going to do a little scoring quick at about 1 inch, and then we'll set the blade to 2 inches to cut all the way through, just to make it a little safer, prevent kickback, and it just also makes for a cleaner cut that way. So we're going to make one shallow pass, and then we'll do a final pass through the same cut. So we're going to cut the length now, and then we're going to cut to the width. And we're going to do this opposite on the other board. So there's two big boards we're cutting up here. So you could do it either way. You can cut the depth to start, or you could cut the length to the final length or width, whatever you want to call it. For these, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to get these all trimmed up now with the track saw. Okay, so we're on the second slab here, so we're going to start trimming this bark off and clean this live edge up, and then we'll cut this up to final length and width or depth, and then we'll run these through the planer, all these pieces together. We'll run through the planer since they're going to be just under 13 inches in depth, so they'll fit through the planer, which definitely speeds this process up. And then we're going to be installing these on site. I also ordered some shelves. Uh, Most likely won't be video in the customer's home. I typically don't like doing that. Sometimes I'll ask permission or I will, but typically I don't like doing that because usually I'm talking to them and just working, and so I just typically don't like video. So when I do install these, just I'm going to be looking for studs. I have a stud finder. I'll bring a laser, a big level, and impact driver and drill. Really, is about all I need to install these when I get on site. So that's fairly simple. We're ordering the shelf brackets. I just have to match an existing one that she already has on site, and then we'll order similar brackets, and then like I said, we'll install when we get there. But right now, we're just going to clean the second slab up, cut down the final length and depth, and then we'll run these all through the planer. Since these pieces will all be just about under 13 inches in depth, so they'll fit through the planer, which definitely helps. So you can see here we started our cleanup process on these pieces. So first I like to start with a belt sander at about 60 grit to get rid of any high spots and get one flat surface. It's a little rough, but then we'll work up our grits to about 220 grit to get a nice, even, smooth surface before we start applying our epoxy and also our mineral oils. But right now we're going to start fixing some little big knots we had in the one edge here, and any other little small knots. We're going to fill with some epoxy with some black dye mixed in just to clean them up and give that contrast look before we finish the entire shelves with the epoxy. So right now we're just going to fill some gaps and nail some knots with the epoxy, like I said, with the black dye. So that's about it. We're going to get these cleaned up before we start preparing for our final finish, which is the hardest part for me because I'm not really an epoxy guy. My epoxy guy that I normally use wasn't go to for this wasn't available. He was pretty busy, so I'm just going to do it myself. And I've done plenty of these. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do. But we'll do this. We'll apply some heat and we'll go from there. So now we're going to be finishing up these slabs here. We're going to put a water pop on, and that will raise the grain so we can do our final sanding with our higher grits. And we're going to be cleaning up any scratches. You can see here we filled that knot hole with the epoxy and black dye, and that's all dry now overnight. And now we're going to start raising this grain and doing our final sanding. I like to wet the, not just the raise the fibers and grains, but also I can see any scratch marks from the rougher sanding grits that I could definitely make sure I can, it helps me sand them out. This one doesn't look too bad. I don't see too many scratches, besides in the epoxy here. So we'll run the test tool over this to kind of finish this out more later. But we're going to run a router first, but that's with the wet these, see how they look, scratch wise. These don't look too bad actually. The walt does a pretty good job too. This has 120 grit on it, or maybe 100, but it has the good sandpaper on there. Does a pretty good job. All right. So after this, we're going to do some more sanding. We're going to run a route these bottom and top edges off, get rid of these sharp edges, and then we're going to put some mineral oil on these, get the darken color, and then we're going to epoxy. Leave it to that, hopefully. This one, I see some scratches in it. So here we're going to run a chamfer on the edges, especially of the live edge, since we want to soften that edge a little bit. So just gives a little bit of a 45-degree angle to go along with the edge. And so that's what we're doing here. We're just going to run that and do a little more sanding before we finish. And to finish these, we're going to be using a mineral oil, and then we're going to be using a Toto Boat epoxy resin with a hardener. I know there's different things you could probably use for this. It's just what I typically use. Like I said, I'm not a huge epoxy person, and the person I usually use, like I mentioned earlier, wasn't available for this. I probably would have paid him to do it. But the weather was really nice, so it was really no wind, so it wasn't too dusty, and the temperature was perfect for this. So it definitely made it a little easier for me to do this myself. Typically I don't like doing these in my shop due to dust, and doing it outside, obviously if there's wind, they're going to be blowing debris around. But right now, you just see it in a couple minutes when I start epoxying these. I could do a lot of it outside because the weather is absolutely beautiful right now. It's about 75 degrees, zero wind, just sunny, and just perfect climate for this. So here you can see we're doing our final sanding, removing all any scratch or imperfections, and then we're getting ready for a finish. You can see I'm really being diligent here with the water and the sanding, just to remove any scratches. I don't like want to see any scratches, because once you put this epoxy on, it's really hard to get that off to clean up any imperfections. So sometimes you won't notice it until you get that far. So here we're just taking the shelf brackets we ordered and just kind of lining them up, make sure they fit. These are going to be 10-inch wide brackets, deep brackets, I guess you call it. So we're going to be lining these up now and just getting a layout of them. So we're going to mark. So you got to remember when we lay these out at the customer's house, studs are 16-inch on center. So these 28-inch ones are going to be a little funny looking because they're not going to be completely centered because they're going against a wall on one end and then obviously a wall behind them on the back end. So with 16 inches on center and there was no stud against the one wall. So it makes it a little funny looking, but they weren't moving, so it's not a big deal. So we're just going to kind of lay these out just to make sure that they're not too big with the live edge on the bottom. And now we're going to be applying some mineral oil. And this does two things. Once it darkens the wood, gives it the final color, but also cleans up any dust. We do not want any dust on these when we start applying our epoxy. It's very important not to have any dust or have it perfect setup, especially with the dusty shops. Sometimes even though I have my air filter on, and I kind of try to keep as clean as possible, and also going to do a lot of this outside, like I mentioned earlier, since it's so nice out and there's no wind, so this will work out pretty good. So here we're just going to start mixing epoxy. I'm going to do a little bit at a time. Do one shelf at a time here for the most part, maybe two at the most. Uh, so I don't want it to dry too fast because this epoxy starts setting, and I don't want it to bubble up. So we're just going to mix up one shelf at a time, like I mentioned, and just spread it on with a spreader, and then we'll apply some heat to remove any bubbles, and let them sit overnight. A quick note here. I'm outside doing this, and I didn't put anything down on the ground for the excess epoxy. I'm going to be re-blacktopping this driveway this fall, hopefully, or the very worst, or the spring. So I'm not really worried about making a mess here. As you can see, I have paint stains, a lot of dust, so it's not that great out there right now. So we're going to be resealing this like I said, this fall or spring. So I'm not really worried about the excess epoxy laying on the ground here. Usually I would put bags down or put a tarp, but I figure this, sometimes that could stick to the ground with the tarp, or if especially cheaper plastic or whatever. So I'm not really too concerned with that. Just a little quick note. So here we're going to apply the heat gun at least one or two more times. The lighters, these are still wet just to get rid of any bubbling. And then we're going to do, like I said, the next day after they dry, we're going to do a sanding with a higher grit. And then we're going to reapply some more epoxy for our final coat. And then these will be ready to ship out and to install. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to start cleaning these up, then applying some more epoxy. Just a very little bit on here. So it's the next day. These are dry. These are the bottoms. Now we're going to flip these over to the tops. Okay, so this project's pretty much done. We're ready to deliver and install these shelves at the client's home. They were very happy with them, thank God. They came out pretty nice, and we also got more work from the client, other projects, hopefully. So that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.